Hello, I am Lynn Wakely, President of the League of Women Voters of Boulder County. The video you are about to view is a recording of the League's Meet Your Legislators held on April 7, 2012. A power outage occurred at the beginning of the forum. We lost the recording of my welcoming remarks, the moderator's instructions to the representatives, and the representatives' 2-minute opening remarks. Otherwise, the video captures the content of the forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We never support or oppose a political party or candidate. The purpose of this forum is to give you an opportunity to meet your legislators and inform you about proposed legislation. I'd like to thank Lisa Collins and Channel 22, the Boulder Valley School District for the use of the boardroom, Seal Ruffing, Second Vice President, who coordinated the event today, and our moderator, Jeanette Hillary, who is a member of the Boulder County League and active on the State League's Legislative Action Committee. The forum will be aired on the League of Women Voters of Boulder County website, lwvbc.org, Channel 22, and other public access channels. We ask that anyone who records this forum in any format please respect the League's nonpartisanship, follow the FCC rules to preserve the context or intent of what is being said, and air the recording in its entirety. Thank you.
Claire, can you think of a bill that would or would not help or would help low-income Coloradoans?
I'm actually struggling a little bit to think of one, but where my mind goes, because I've been working on the budget now since November, is some of the good things that we've been able to do through the budget. We're going to put $9.7 million more into the old age pension program and dental benefits for seniors who aren't old enough, between the age of 60 and 65, so they don't qualify for Medicaid, and they also, Medicare, and they don't qualify for Medicaid. So we're making more funds available through the old age pension program. We did, I think, some good things on the Medicaid program that will help reform from a fee-for-service delivery method to a global payments method that will save money, deliver better services to people. So there are things in that area where we're just going to be able to hopefully serve the needy population a little bit better. We also were able, thanks very much to the efforts of Boulder County, to restore some of the TANF money to the counties that the state had been using to pay for its own child welfare offices. We were able to move some of that money back into counties because the counties' caseloads have risen so dramatically. For TANF is temporary aid to needy services, or needy families, for those of you who don't know. So I think I would have to say optimistically that I think there's real concern about people in poverty. We may not agree with the way other people show that concern, but I think that concern is there, and at least in terms of the services the state provides or funds for the counties to provide, I think we're making some real progress in preserving that safety net.
Okay. And we are on live time. We've been rolling apparently for a while. But Dickie Lee, could you comment on what bill you think might be helping low-income people?
Right. Well, I agree with my colleagues, and particularly the bills that are and the budget issues that Representative Levy talked about. I think have been the most helpful and is somewhat encouraging, because we have been able to restore some TANF funding that was very important. The money that's going to go in by bill to actually fund dental care and to increase the amount of money that goes into the old age pension is very important. I will mention that, and I believe there may be an attempt to amend the budget bill to provide some additional money to a bill that was sponsored by Representative Kafalas that would, and we'll hopefully find a way to get that in the budget, that would provide additional money to the system of that provides additional funds to senior citizens, primarily for restoration, weatherization, and additional direct funding for them to pay their utility bills. And we could have added a considerable amount of money, I think, under the current budget process to that. And there is some hope that maybe we'll still be able to make that one work. So one of the things I will say in general is that the jobs bills that have been sponsored by Democrats primarily in the House with some really good ideas, I think will also be very helpful. One we just managed to pass out of the House in a bipartisan way, thank goodness, was a bill that will take a portion of the Unemployment Trust Fund and work with those folks that have been unemployed for a long time to go into specific training programs sponsored by the Department of Labor and by businesses who need people trained for those programs, so that they can be specifically trained and actually take a job when they get done with that process. And I think that'll be very helpful to a lot of people.
That's good. All right, now we're going to go back to what I always call the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the budget. And as Representative Levy indicated, the budget in Colorado is called the Long Bill, and it was introduced into the House, which was its main sponsor this year. And maybe you could talk for 5 minutes or more on some of the issues you have been grappling with the Joint Budget Committee. We've seen a slight increase in the revenue projections. How is this affecting where you're directing funding?
Sure, and I'd be happy to do that. So, as Jeanette indicated, the long bill was introduced on Wednesday. Well, that's not going to matter to people watching this on delay. Wednesday, April 4th, to be precise. And we will most likely be doing second reading debate on Wednesday, April 11th, and then passing it on Thursday, the 12th. So we did have good news in terms of revenue this year, and we're starting to see some steady increase, which did make our budget process much easier. But I'll just highlight the areas where we had the most difficulty in actually coming to agreement and closing the budget. There were a lot of things that while it's a 3-3 committee this session, because we've got 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. The Republicans have 2 spots in the House, and the Democrats have 2 spots in the Senate, and then I'm the minority member from the House, and Senator Kent Lambert is the minority member from the Senate. So with a 3-3 committee, you really need to have consensus because anybody can block, the one party can block the other's initiatives. So we anticipated before we got the final revenue projections that whether or not to fund the senior property tax exemption would be our biggest issue. That was going to require about $96 to $98 million out of the general fund to pay property taxes for seniors, and this is a program that is not means tested. If you own a home, you've owned it, you're 65 years old or older and you've lived in your home for 10 years or more, you were eligible for an exemption of 50% of the first $200,000 in value. And Governor Hickenlooper's budget proposed not granting that exemption, but instead increasing the amount available for low-income seniors to pay their heat, rent, and heat, rent, fuel.
Electric?
And, yeah, and property tax if they owned their home. But thankfully, we did have enough money to fully fund the senior homestead exemption, so we didn't actually have to confront this issue head-on. In my view, we're wasting about $90 million because we are giving tax money to people who don't really need that refund. And if we were able to fully fund K through 12 education, fully fund higher education, then we can think about bestowing gifts upon people just based on the longevity of owning their home. But I think the two areas where we had the most disagreement on the committee had to do with paying state employees. The Republicans wanted to cut the personal services line item across the board in every department by 2%, and that line item is the line from which we pay our state employees, and they wanted to take that cut before we had the revenue projections to know whether that was even necessary. We didn't know if we were in a budget climate that required that kind of cutback, but they were insisting on cutting, and we Democrats agreed to that as a placeholder so that we could move forward, and in exchange we insisted on fully funding the increase in health, life, and dental premiums that our employees would pay. So we got this agreement for the sake of moving forward, and thankfully, as the budget, this is a short summary of the budget right here in front of me, coming forward, we're only cutting personal services line items by 0.1%. Instead of the 2%, I'm sorry, 1%, not 0.1%, and exempting a great many departments, and we were able to fully fund health, life, dental. So I think that was the biggest area where we were able to come to agreement and avoid what would have been a very, very difficult fight on the floor.
Yeah. What is the perspective then, both for, let's say, Representative Singer, for you on the budget? What are some of the issues that you feel are important for your constituents and stuff? 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah. There's a lot. No, I think in terms of the budget, big picture wise, we really need to think about this in terms of the services that that the budget funds, and I think that we need to really get away from talking just about numbers and talking about actual services. And so when you think about what the budget actually funds, the biggest chunks of it really are you think about Medicaid, think about K through 12 education, and then obviously we've got criminal justice, jails, and then roads and bridges, and so all of those things in terms of the budget factor in a huge way. And one of the conversations that we're having right now is what we can do to make sure that kids have the best opportunity moving forward, and how we can funnel more money into that education. And what's unfortunate is that because the budget is so big and it's got so many moving parts, once the long bill really comes out, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room to move around and find new areas of funding, because we don't have the authority to raise taxes. With that being said, though, I think that in terms of your specific question about the budget, I think we need to look a little bit more at that homestead tax exemption. And right now, it's a checkoff, which basically means if you don't claim it, it goes back into the general fund. So maybe if we can find some ways of making sure that instead of having that money go back directly into the general fund, if people choose not to take that exemption, focusing it back into things like K through 12 education. And that's a conversation we'll have to have next week.
Okay, that's good, thank you. And Representative Hullinghorst, you're also on the Appropriations Committee, so you obviously hear a lot, all the bills that have any potential fiscal notes attached to them. So what is your take on this?
Well, I think it's been well explained, the budget process and everything. One area that we haven't had a chance to talk about that I think is very important, and Claire, Representative Levy, gets a lot of credit for this, is that in this budget process, we did close one prison, or we're proposing to close one prison, which is a significant amount of funding. I think there is more work to be done there. There is an opportunity, and in addition to that, I believe you sponsored the bill, Claire, that would study that, and maybe you can speak a little. I'll give her my time to speak a little bit more about this, because corrections is one of the big chunks of money in the budget, and where we are able to make savings in that area will be very useful to us with other priorities like education, and also very good for the public and the people, I think, in many respects, because we're starting to look at a much more progressive approach to how we incarcerate people, for what, and where they are placed, and how we can get them back into communities and into society as productive individuals.
Yeah. And maybe you want to continue and add on to that with some of the fiscal issues related to either prisons or some of the other things.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the Department of Corrections budget is about $653 million. And the state funds the prisons, counties fund jails. So if you're convicted of a misdemeanor and you're sentenced to jail, the counties pay for that. If you're convicted of a felony and you're sentenced to prison, the state pays for that, $653 million. We have state-run prisons and we have private-run prisons, and that's quite a controversial issue. But for the time being, we have these private prisons. But we've actually seen since 2009, when this began, we were starting to see a decline in our state prison population. And people are actually kind of mystified by this, because usually in a recession, crime goes up and prison populations go up. But crime has not gone up, and our prison population continues to go down. And this affords an opportunity for some savings. We think some of that is just related to demographic trends, people getting older and aging out of the high crime years. Some of it has to do with the waning of the crack epidemic. Some of it has to do with changes that we've been making at the state legislature on sentencing policies, and I think greater awareness by trial court judges who do this sentencing of the efficacy or not of putting somebody in prison versus a community-based diversion program. So as Representative Hullinghorst mentioned, we have gotten the political will and the consensus at both ends of the political spectrum and with the Department of Corrections that we do not need to open or keep open Colorado State Penitentiary 2, which is a 2-year-old maximum security solitary confinement configured prison. There are about 318 offenders there right now. And those offenders will slowly be moved out of CSP2, transitioned into the general population. That will save us, once you pay for housing them somewhere else, the net savings is about $5.5 million this year, and then about double that the next year, because we're going to phase them out slowly. But this has been a major source of funding, and now the difficult side of the equation is, as our population continues to decline in prison, whether we should consolidate our offenders in state-run prisons or continue to pay for private prison beds, almost all of which are located in very depressed small towns on the Eastern Plains. And in my view, we're spending almost $10 million more in this budget than we need to spend for the sake of keeping these prisons open, for the sake of the economic livelihood of these towns. They don't serve a correctional need. We don't actually need all of those beds. And we're really just offering this money up as hopefully a bridge to some more enduring, sustainable economic activity in these towns.
Okay, thank you. I do want to go back to the Bill 1315, which is dealing with the Governor's Energy Office and the reconfiguration. And for a question that was asked by the audience, this is a bill that does have bipartisan sponsorship on it. And it's a very long bill in length. I heard it's about 50 pages. But maybe we could spend a few minutes talking about what is happening with the Governor's Energy Office and what impact would this bill actually have, and also some of the funding, because some of this money, they're asking for $3 million to come out of general fund money to fund this, and I never think of the general fund having a lot of excess money in it for other things. So, Dickie Lee, did you want to start in discussing that particular bill and what its ramifications would mean?
Sure.
And maybe a couple minutes on that, and we'll all do that.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Representative Matt Jones, who couldn't be here, and he would be the absolute expert on this if he were here. He has done an excellent job as a member of the Agricultural and Natural Resources in analyzing this bill, providing information, and speaking at this point against it. However, maybe I should start by just explaining the sort of the general both premise and political situation here. If we don't find a way to fund more money going into the Governor's Energy Office, there will have to be a large number of layoffs. That department can't move forward, primarily because most of their money came from the federal government under the ERA funds and other funds that have now are gone. So that's one of the major reasons that a bill like this needs to pass. To be perfectly honest, the Republicans, many Republicans in the House, would just as soon see the Office of Energy Conservation and the kinds of things that they do go away. So in order for us to move forward with some funding for this office, we do need to find a way to pass a bill that they would support and that therefore will get funding. We have the bill that I voted against the bill coming out of appropriations that was given to us by the Agriculture Committee. I think there are some amendments that make it better. This is adding to the mission of the Office of Energy Conservation, now renamed the Office of Energy, by saying that this office will look at and provide help to regular energy sources like fossil fuel. It will also look very closely at providing incentives to gas, defined as a clean source of energy, and to clean coal. So it broadens the mission, and it is troublesome to many of us, and I'll pass it on to some of my other colleagues to provide some more details on that.
Okay. Representative Levy, did you want to continue and add on to some of that and your perspective on it?
Sure, I can do that a little bit. Let me speak to a couple of aspects of the bill. One, Jeanette, you alluded to the funding source, which you found to be unusual. I actually like it. Well, I like half of it, and I don't like the other half of it. Before the Recovery Act money, the federal money, basically supplanted general fund money. It was funded out of limited gaming revenues, and those revenues fluctuate. And so Joint Budget Committee staff recommended that we fund it instead out of general fund. And in a sense, it's the same money. We're just, instead of taking it directly from the limited gaming fund and putting it to the governor's energy office. We're putting that limited gaming revenue into the general fund and then funding the office. So it's the same money, but I think it actually logically works better. If this is a core function of government, which I think it should be in this era, we ought to fund it with general fund money. But the part of it that I don't like is that about $1.8 million of funding for the office is going to come from severance tax funds. And those who support that side of the equation view that money, because it's coming from severed minerals, oil and gas, coal, and others, as then being legitimately spent to support fossil fuel, what they call traditional energy sources. And those of us who have been opposing this bill, and I continue to oppose it without significant amendments, feel that an energy office's job should be to look at the future, look at our future energy needs and mix, and try to foster an innovative, more future forward-looking energy policy. And as long as we're relying 50% on severance tax and then viewing that as legitimately belonging to the fossil fuel industry, I think the office really isn't going to serve this forward-looking purpose.
Right. Okay. And Representative Singer, do you have perspectives on the?
Yeah, I'll be real quick because I think it's already been well spoken to, and I agree. In terms of the governor's energy office, it's something that we need to maintain. The question is how we do it and whether this is the best way to do it. And there, to say that I have some reservations is probably an understatement. But when Representative Levy talks about looking to the future, Governor Ritter really did bring that word "new energy economy" into the spotlight, and that's something that we need to continue in one of the windiest and sunniest states in the country. We need to continue banging that drum, because when you talk about economic growth and sustainable economic growth and real jobs that are going to pay real wages, it's going to come from places like the new energy economy, where wind and solar do have those opportunities to bring us into the 21st century, where I guess we should already be.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to go back to an area of sort of dealing with the district attorneys and some of it. One of the more contentious bills this session has been 1271, which was the direct file. And maybe you could speak to this. I know it's an issue very close to Representative Levy's heart, but it's also been a very much concerned bill for the League also. So maybe, I don't know, I'll start with Representative Singer. What is your feelings on the direct file and its implications? And you have a couple of minutes to talk about that.
Sure, thank you. And just for those out there on TV, and I think Representative Levy, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but basically what direct file is it essentially allows district attorneys to file on juveniles as adults without a whole lot of judicial oversight. So what this bill does, or what this bill will hopefully do, is make it so that DAs aren't the judge, jury, and executioner on something like this. It's costing the state a lot of money. A lot of conservatives have hopped on board in terms of making sure that DAs don't have the ability to direct file. And it's really interesting when you talk about bipartisanship at the State House. When we voted on this bill in the House, you had about, it was interesting to see the breakdown, because there was bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition, and it was almost, well, not quite, but almost an even split. So, I supported taking this authority away from district attorneys. It hasn't shown itself to be effective. It's actually shown itself to be racially biased and cost us a lot of money. And it really doesn't focus on doing what we should be doing for juveniles, which is getting them, turning them into taxpayers is the term that I hear a lot about. We don't want to set them up to be on a track to stay in jail for the remainder of their lives. We want to get them back into the regular population, and this is one way to do it and save some money along the way.
Okay, thank you. Representative Levy.
Thank you. And this bill actually is something near and dear to my heart. I actually wasn't the sponsor this year, but it's the third run at true reform of the direct file process that we've had in Colorado. The first one I sponsored in 2008, and Governor Ritter vetoed it. The second time in 2010, then Minority Leader Mike May and I teamed up in a bipartisan manner to pass a bill, and it passed and was signed into law, but it didn't go as far as what we were able to do just last week with House Bill 1271, which we do believe the governor will sign. But it's a bill that brings out the passions both for and against. And one of the things that I wanted people to think about, because the district attorneys claimed that direct file has been such an important tool in keeping juvenile crime rates down, what I thought was really important for people to actually think about was the fact that Colorado is one of only 4 states that does not have any opportunity for judicial review of the decision to direct file. So that means there are 46 states in which either they do not have the direct file power at all, or it's reviewable. And in those 46 other states, we don't have super predators, we don't have out-of-control juvenile crime rates. And so it really highlighted a situation of the district attorneys simply not wanting to give up power that they were accustomed to exercising unilaterally and without any review.
Yeah, okay. And Representative Hollinghorst, your take on this?
Thank you. Well, I don't know that I have much to add to that issue. I strongly support this bill. And I believe, I don't know where it is in the Senate right now, but I think it passed. So we hope the governor will sign it.
To the governor.
It's a great step forward in juvenile justice in this state. We've needed it for a long time. And I applaud Representative Levy for her efforts on this. I also want to give a big shout out to our district attorney. Because he really, Mr. Gardner really did stand up pretty much all alone and support this bill, and for very good reason, and was very articulate about why, and was helpful in the process. But he was just about the only district attorney that supported.
That's what I heard also, yes. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm going to shift a little to an issue that's in the paper a lot recently, and that's hydraulic fracturing and the looking for other sources of fuels. Again, these are all fossil fuels. This session there were 5 bills introduced that are dealing with oil and gas. 4 have already died. A lot of them are dealing with local control over oil and gas potential. Some are addressing maybe water quality. One would be notification of severed mineral rights, a bunch of things like that. The governor did set up a committee at the end of February to look at this, a task force. But where do you see any potential bills, either late status or what's been happening on a discussion in the floor on the oil and gas and the hydraulic fracturing issues? And I'll start with Representative Hollinghorst, a couple of minutes there.
Well, I think many of you know that there is a governor's task force now that is studying this. I think we will, I hopefully will see some action and some good action come out of that with regard to what kind of legislation would be appropriate. I do know that I would have supported the bills that were killed in the House if I'd had an opportunity to vote for them on the floor. And they were dealing primarily with water quality in one instance, and 2 of them, one sponsored by Representative Jones, that dealt with giving local governments more adequate power to deal with these issues. And I know we're all aware, I certainly am, I'm hearing a lot from my constituents on this issue. And there is grave concern about water quality related to this, and impacts to residential neighborhoods that are, I believe, are just simply unacceptable. If in fact these impacts do come forward, I think we do need to have some further legislation, and I think we will in future years, and hopefully we will solve this problem for people.
Right, yeah. As you mentioned, Representative Matt Jones did have a bill. It was very specific in addressing local government's control in working with the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission on having them address land use impacts when they're doing well sightings and permits. Anyway, Representative Levy.
Yeah, thank you. And I am sorry that Representative Jones isn't here to talk about it, because I think he's the most well-informed about it. What the issue comes down to, basically, is a legal concept called preemption. And the question, and this isn't the first time this has come up, relative to oil and gas drilling. There's actually a long history of trying to find where that line is between state regulation and local regulation, and at what point has the state so comprehensively regulated this area that they've occupied the field and have preempted all local government regulation. I think we've made a mistake in Colorado by treating oil and gas drilling, whether it involves hydraulic fracturing or not, as something other than an industrial activity which local governments at the state or the county or municipal level have always had the authority to regulate. And so because the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, whose task is simply looking at the technical aspects of it and the water quality, they do get environmental studies, but their job is to issue drilling permits based on a completely different set of parameters and considerations than local governments think about when they do land use. So I think I'm actually not optimistic that this task force will be helpful, because Governor Hickenlooper believes that the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission should regulate the area entirely. I think he already has decided that local governments should not have that land use power. I don't think the commission has, or this task force has really been given full enough authority to consider where that balance is. And I think this is something that is going to have to percolate up, no pun intended, from the grassroots here for a number of years before we really get the balance right.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Singer, your perception on this?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I just held a town hall at Front Range Community College, and a question about hydraulic fracturing or fracking came up. And as I started talking about it, about half the people had really confused looks on their faces. And so I'm just going to ask the audience here, does anyone here not know what hydraulic fracturing is, basically? Okay, so everyone has some understanding of it. So just for the folks who might...
people, we know a lot about this stuff.
Well, I'm glad I do too. So I'm glad we're on the same page there. So in terms for the benefit of folks watching on TV, basically in a layman's sense of it, basically what we're trying to do is people who are using hydraulic fracturing are basically putting fluids and water in a very water-intensive process to break up the ground to get our natural resources out of there, like natural gas. Unfortunately, I think that the only people that are really in favor of the way that it's being done right now might be 12-year-old boys, because what you can do is you can turn your water tap on in certain parts of the state and light that water on fire. So if you want to go for the 12-year-old boy vote, I think you've got it there. But in all seriousness, I do have some concerns about this, and I think the way Representative Matt Jones puts it is, we have rules about setbacks, and this is a very simple proposition. How far back should fracturing operation be from residences? And right now, a medical marijuana dispensary needs to be usually 1,000 feet away from a school. But when you're talking about cancer-causing agents like benzene being pumped into the ground, those don't have the same setback requirements. And, it's not apples and oranges here. It's something that's pretty concerning. And when my neighborhood at Trail Ridge Middle School has got benzene levels at 100 times the allowable level, I've got some real concerns.
Okay, thank you. One of the other issues, and it was briefly touched on by Representative Levy in talking about the budget, was education. And how do you feel funding for the education is going this year, as well as any bills that might be of concern or help you in the future for education? How do you see some of those bills going? And I'll start with Representative Singer on the education issues, funding, and other things.
Thanks. So in terms of education, I think this is probably.
2 minutes. Sorry.
Are we good?
Sorry.
Okay. So in terms of education, I think this is probably the most critical issue when you talk about state services. You're talking about investing in, our future. Who will be the next job holders? Who will be the next president of the United States? Who will be, unfortunately, our next criminals too? And if we don't get that good foundation, then our future is pretty much laid out in front of us. So the one thing that I want to focus on is Proposition 103, which was a bill that would actually fund education at a higher rate, and it failed last year. Now, the governor said that the people of Colorado have no appetite for a tax increase. I want to go back and say that if we start talking about services first, then I think there's a real chance that we can go back to the voters and say, yes, we do want to invest in education. When you looked at Proposition 103, I think the first line in that referred measure was, shall taxes be increased by $500 million? And then you get the fine print. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Even if I go buy a car, I look at the shiny car first, and then I get the fine print. And if we can unravel some of the mess that we've got with Tabor and Aargau-Burr and other constitutional amendments that we've got right now, and actually have something that says something to the effect, put something on the ballot that says something to the effect of, shall teachers have a maximum of a 1 to 25 student to teacher ratio in K through 12 schools in Colorado, and then we start talking about how we're going to pay for that. I think people will have a better understanding and be more willing to vote for something like that initiative. So that's one start. Of course, there's all sorts of other things with the Lobato case and other things going on right now. But I think that's one place that we can start, hopefully in the next year.
Okay. Representative Levy, in the budget for education, you've seen an increase, or that we are allowed to be able to fund this year. What are your other takes on that?
Well, thank you. When it comes to education, I fully endorse everything that Representative Singer said. These are our future voters. These are the people who we hope will separate fact from fiction as they gather information about current events. And we need to educate them so they can do that, not just so they can have a job. So the budget, what we do in the long bill is we settle on a global number that we will use as the state's portion of the School Finance Act. And then the School Finance Act, which Representative Tom Massey will carry in the House, actually delineates how that money will be spent. What we were able to do in the budget this year is fund all of the additional students that have entered the system in the last fiscal year. So we will fund all of those students, but unfortunately we're funding them at last year's per pupil amount. We're not able to keep up with inflation, and so we're about $600 per student lower than we need to be just to keep up with inflation from last year. We've got a cumulative deficit that we've been building in our per pupil funding over quite a number of years as we've been in a bad budget situation. So it's a good news, bad news, just as far as the budget's concerned, that we're not forcing additional actual cuts year over year in terms of the global number, but we're not keeping pace with inflation, and we're billions of dollars short of where we should be, according to the judge's decision in the Lobato case and according to other states throughout the country, in terms of just adequately, not well funding, but just adequately funding education.
And Representative Hollinghorst, education funding. And
So I agree completely with my colleagues on everything that they've said. First of all, our best economic development tool as a state government is to provide adequate, not just adequate, but an excellent K through 12 education and opportunity for our students to go to college. That should be our first priority, in my opinion, as a state, and as a state legislator, I take that very seriously. We have had great difficulty in this state because we must do a balanced budget. And we have not had the authority since Tabor to raise taxes to make sure that we provide the best core services that we can. Education is at the top of that list. And I will quote my friend Senator Heath, who I'm sorry couldn't be here today. We are the 7th wealthiest state in the nation. And we fund K through 12 education and higher education at a level that is one of the worst in the country. It's at 50th or 48th or 49th every year it's analyzed. That's not acceptable. Only 5% of our funding, general fund money, goes now to the University of Colorado, our flagship public university. That's not acceptable. We need to find ways to do it, and the only way that we're going to find to adequately fund education is to find a way to raise taxes and to make people understand that if they really want that service, they're going to have to pay for it in future years.
While we had lost power, we had a good discussion, I thought, on voter service and voter rights bills that are in the session. And I'd like the public to hear some of the discussion that we had, so maybe we could sort of succinctly summarize some of our issues with some of the bills that dealt with voter ID, the fraud issues, et cetera. And I'll start again with you, Representative Hollinghorst, and a couple minutes to talk about some of the voter bills that are going on, those that are alive and others that are not. So,
Okay, I'll talk about one that I'm somewhat familiar with because I was substituting for another colleague who couldn't be at local government a couple weeks ago, and we heard the bill on active and inactive voters, and I apologize that this is a repeat to some of you sitting in the audience, but that bill was brought by a number of county clerks and who have had issues with this with the Secretary of State before, and there is a court case. Who are looking for ways to solve the issues of how you deal with what is now referred to as inactive voters, someone who did not vote in the last general election. Now, they could have voted in a municipal election, but it was gathered. And in order to make sure that these folks got their address changed or that they didn't lose their right to vote because they were automatically removed from the voter list, there were any number of postcards and mailings and other things that went to them, and the dispute was over whether if someone had signed up for a permanent absentee ballot in one instances, whether they had the clerks had the right to mail to them an absentee ballot if they hadn't voted in the last general election. They were defined as inactive. So they came up with a perfect solution, which was just simply to do away with the inactive voter designation, to have voters removed from the voter files after they hadn't voted in 2 general elections with one simple postcard that verified they were no longer living at their address. Also using the federal postal database that what is used in many instances even by the Secretary of State, but not in this particular one, to check addresses and change people's addresses, which is a great service to people who might otherwise not understand that they have to re-register. There were probably about 10 people in committee testifying in support of this bill, including the League of Women Voters and a number of county clerks. And the only person who voted against it or who testified against it was the Secretary of State, and this bill was killed on a straight party line vote. So that gives you an idea of the atmosphere that we're dealing with on this issue.
okay, thank you. And Representative Levy, some of your issues and takes on some of the voter service bills this year, voting rights.
I think the one that has received probably the most publicity has been a bill to require photo ID in order to vote. And in my view, in a time when we ought to be doing everything we can to increase voter participation, to get people to turn out and exercise their franchise, instead, this bill has come forward year after year that would make it harder for those who are registered to vote to actually cast their ballot. The premise is very simplistic and I think wrong. The premise appears to be that people are showing up to vote claiming to be somebody who is elected, who is registered, and not actually being that person. And we have no instances in which that has ever happened, or at least that it's been alleged to have happened, that somebody has tried to impersonate someone at the polls in order to exercise their right to vote. But the proponents of it claim that it's easy to get ID, that everybody carries ID in this day and age. You can't get on an airplane without ID. You cannot buy a gun without ID. They have a lot of examples of how common it is to require ID to perform simple transactions. But what they forget about is that people who are not affluent, who don't get on airplanes every day, who are disabled, who are elderly, and who no longer maintain a passport or a driver's license, don't typically have ID readily available. And it's not only expensive for somebody on a fixed income, but it is physically arduous to get to the state or county office to get the documentation, such as a birth certificate, that you would need. And so we're seeing too many hurdles to being able to vote that aren't necessary for the integrity of the process.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Singer.
Thanks. You know, I think that the big question that I always go back to is, do you want more people to vote or less people to vote? And how do you get people involved? And, you know, I thought basically the voter ID bill to me is the equivalent of a poll tax. I thought we had solved that issue about 60 years ago. And apparently not, so here we are again. On the positive side, and I know this is a little bit of repetition, you know, I was going to use a bad pun earlier and say we shouldn't leave the voters in the dark, but the only people will understand that in this room with the power interruption. But in all seriousness, you know, we need to talk about ways to get more people involved, and either whether it's through same-day voter registration or what Representative Gardner was going to introduce and what I was able to introduce in terms of getting voter pre-registration, where 16-year-olds can get themselves pre-registered to vote so they're all ready and set to go by the time they turn 18, are incredibly important things. And if we want to have a thriving democracy, it means we need more people involved and more educated people involved on these issues.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start ending the session, and I'd like each of you to, in 2 or 3 minutes, to sort of see, where do you see the next month going? What are some of the contentious bills that may get passed or not passed? And you know, just sort of summarize also if you have any bills alive that you would still like to see moving forward. You can address that also. And I'm going to start with Representative Levy.
In how many minutes?
You can have 2.5.
Okay, 2.5 minutes. Okay, well, thank you. And I'll just use this time to wrap up. And I first want to say how refreshing it is to have Representative Jonathan Singer with us here today, the newest kid on the block, in more ways than one. And I always learn something from listening to my fellow legislators. And so I look forward to these opportunities and to all the other opportunities we have to be together. So I do want to talk about 2 more bills that I have that we haven't touched on here today that are still alive, and they're both in the area of criminal justice. One of them would reduce the penalty for possession of small amounts of controlled substances from a felony to a misdemeanor. And there's an article in today's Denver Post about vehement opposition to that bill by the district attorneys and by some local governments because of what it will cost county jails if we're no longer housing these offenders in prisons. I think that's a red herring. Most of these offenders actually will not go to either jail or prison. They generally are sentenced to probation. But the issue in my mind is not just whether we're going to get drug addicts treatment, addiction treatment services, rather than simply punish them. The issue is whether they're going to have a felony conviction on their record, which ties into another bill I did, which is trying to remove hurdles to employment for people with felony convictions. Back in President Johnson's time, a commission on crime did a study, and it concluded that about 25% of the American population is going to have a felony conviction on their record before they reach the age of 30. And I'm sure that that trend has not gone down at all because we have been waging the war on drugs now for the last 40 years. And when you think about the hurdles to employment to a person who has a felony conviction, I think it makes it abundantly clear that if we have a societal problem with drug use and drug abuse, the best thing to do is not to make it then a lifelong penalty that will inhibit their ability to earn a living. What we need to do is treat that addiction as a medical condition and use the threat of criminal sanction in order to get them into treatment and keep them into treatment, but then not saddle them with unemployment for life because they have a felony. So I wanted to be able to get that off my chest before we left here this morning. We have I think, a tsunami of a problem coming at us here in the form of the percentage of our population with felonies who will be permanently underemployed. And I do want to just close quickly here by thanking the League for giving us this opportunity to share with you what we're doing and the rest of the legislature is doing.
Yeah. And the bill that Representative Levy was talking about is 1263, which is gone to the Senate. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that it's had a hearing yet for Senate Judiciary yet. So.
No, it has not. And then the other bill is Senate Bill 163, which is on the drug sentencing.
Yeah. Okay. Representative Singer, and welcome as our newest member. And you have 2.5 minutes to sort of talk about whatever.
Thank you. I hope to be back here next year. So, it's a real pleasure to have folks coming out on a Saturday on Easter and Passover weekend to participate in their democracy. I hope that, we can continue to meet on a one-on-one basis. And what I've really been focused on, in addition to being a proud co-sponsor of Senate Bill 163 with Representative Levy and a number of Republicans as well, is really focusing on constituent outreach. I really want people to be able to come to my office and talk to me about any issues that are on their mind, any issues that might be affecting them personally, even if it doesn't have a legislative solution. And I've had people from both the right wing and the left wing side of my community come up to me to talk about everything from transportation to gambling to criminal justice reform, actually. And it's one of those. This is one of these things where you don't always get a chance to pick your moments. I was sent here or nominated by a vacancy committee, and it's not something that I was planning on. But here I am. And so I want to be there for you as the voters. And I'll wrap up with one quick example of a constituent that came to me to talk about criminal justice issues, actually. And it wasn't even a bill that I was carrying, but they had an interest in it. And it turns out they themselves had been a victim of a pretty egregious crime themselves. And had never actually reached out to law enforcement. They were afraid to talk to anyone about this, actually. And like I said, you don't always pick your moments, but when they come up, you need to be ready for it. And I was able to work with that individual to get them in touch with law enforcement, and hopefully, we'll get some justice for that person as that hopefully that perpetrator will be put away for a long time now. And that's what I think being a representative is about. It's not a passive job of just representing, but it's also advocating and standing up for your community. And so on April 12th, I look forward to having my only bill to survive both the House and Senate signed that will get tax credits, keep tax credits in Colorado for people who lease hybrid vehicles. And if you want to talk to me more after today, I'd be happy to do that. And I would encourage people, lastly, to join my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/singer, the number 4 house, Singer for House. And I try to give if not daily updates every other day, just 1 to 2 sentence blurb about what's happening at the Capitol and how you can get involved. And if you put comments up there, I'll respond to those. And that's just a new way to have better access to your democracy without spending the gas money to get down to Denver.
Thank you very much. And Representative Hollinghorst.
Thank you very much. It's always great being here, and I want to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to speak to our constituents. I consider it an honor and a privilege to be a representative in the State House. It still gives me chills every once in a while as I walk in the Capitol or take a vote on an important issue. It's a real privilege, and I thank my constituents and I thank all of you for your support. I have a wonderful district to represent, and I do get a lot of input from my constituents, and for the most part I agree with them. But if I don't, I really want to have that dialogue to hear what they have to say and to know that I'm representing them too, and hopefully there will be an issue coming down the pike that we all agree on if I disagree with someone. So I invite people to email me. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. It seems to be the way people do things, although I'm accepting and will respond to snail mail letters if you send them to me. We get very few of those. We get most emails, and I do the very best I can. If you're in my district, to respond to you, whether it's a constituent issue that I can help with or whether it's on an issue that we're dealing with at the state legislature or in an idea for a bill. I would really love to hear you on all of these. I'd also like to specifically thank the League of Women Voters for the support that they've given me on a number of issues. One of the things that I didn't bring up and that we probably don't have a lot of time to get into is that as the ranking member of Finance and on the Appropriations Committee, I've taken a particular interest in reform of our tax expenditure laws. It's a way that we can make sure that the revenue that we're getting all of it, and that it isn't being siphoned off for a tax credit or a tax benefit to someone over many years' time that we don't even know it's going out of our revenue system, primarily to business and to specific special interests, without accountability and transparency. And I've had a number of bills this year that have been killed. I'm happy to have co-sponsored a bill that will at least do a task force to study enterprise zones, which has been a way that we could provide some tax incentive to small businesses, primarily was what it was originally designed to do, and to areas of the state that are economically underemployed or under income. Right now, those enterprise zones have expanded to 70% of the state, Boulder County not being one of those, by the way. And the largest industries in the state, primarily oil and gas and others, take about, in the millions of dollars with investment income tax credit, take about 70% of the funds that go out of our revenue system in the tune of millions of dollars. So it really needs to be reformed. We hope this task force will work. I had another bill that was killed that would have gone right at it this time. But I really appreciate the League of Women's support on those issues that are pretty complex, and you always come and testify, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the audience and the public for putting up with our power outage today and for coming and giving us questions. We couldn't get to all of them. I want to thank the legislators for coming. There's a lot going on under the Gold Dome, which is under repair, and I appreciate your participation. Look forward to us this fall for your voter service. Right now, there's only one ballot issue that's made the ballot on marijuana, so but it's going to be an exciting election year, and I want to thank Seal Ruffing and the rest of the league people who helped put this together, and have a good day.